Welcome to the Learning Reinvented Podcast, brought to you by myself, James Poletyllo, and the team at the Learning Effect. There are lots of learning podcasts out there, so we wanted to do something slightly different. This week, we'll be looking at employee engagement and how it can link to learning. I'm delighted to welcome Nick Court to the podcast. Nick, thank you for joining us. Do you want to introduce yourselves to the listeners and tell them a little bit about yourself?
Hi. Thanks for having me on the podcast, James. I'm Nick Court. So I'm the CEO of a company called the People Experience Hub. We measure employee feedback and help companies improve employee experience, people experience. My background, having worked for companies like Tesco, Associated British Foods and Carlsberg, I left those organisations to set up my own business, and since then I've worked with some great companies, helping them improve insights, data, and overall that people experience. And I guess my passion is really around that insights, not information piece.
Yeah, and I think, I wanted to talk to you because I think there's some real links between learning and engagement, both in terms of working together, but also in terms of how they sit within organisations and sometimes are used or misused. And if I look back at the similarities between the two, and I look back sort of 4 or 5 years ago, and often for organisations, learning looked like some annual refresher training with a few other programs for special people through the year or for key functions. And, my outside view on engagement sometimes was it was an annual engagement survey followed up with a few actions taken throughout the year, and then, it's another year through and let's do an annual engagement survey. So, what's your view on that and where we've come from and where we're going with engagement?
Yeah, so I guess, it is interesting. So you're absolutely right. We had almost an institution created around the annual survey, and we had large organizations that made it their business to come in, ask those 120, 140 questions. It would take you nearly an hour to get through them. Then they would create this, hundreds and hundreds of pages of PowerPoint information, a chart per page that the leaders in an organization would get and try and work out, what do I do with this? And the default was, well, I can't do much with 120 pages of data. I'll choose 3 that either stick out, as in, confirmation bias. They play to what I thought already, and that's what I was going to tackle anyway. So it just gives me a little bit of ammo, or they get lost in that analysis paralysis. And it created this monster, and people rightly started to challenge it and move away. But what then happened was my cynicism, apologies to everyone who's in this place, my cynicism kicks in. What happened was tech providers decided they could solve this problem with technology, so we could make a seamless, always on, continual pulse information. We could ask people questions outside of that annual review, questions when it mattered most, that kind of view, which makes sense. It's like you listen to it and you go, that makes sense to me. That's that sounds reasonable. And of course it was tech companies that delivered that, because it was a tech solution that we needed, not a people solution. But the downside of that has been, we're now coming out of that, because people have now said, well, actually, what I have so much information. It is absolutely easy to deploy a monthly pulse survey or a continual always on solution. But people are now saying the value is low, because I have no baseline of information. I don't really know what's going on month to month. If you think about noise, that's what it's created. It's created so much noise that 120-page report that we used to get, gathering dust in a drawer somewhere, has now just become 120 pages of information every single month that nobody can really do anything with. So lots and lots and lots of information has actually now gone monthly, not annually, and people are now struggling to do that. So I personally think we're coming out of that now, and we're going to a different model, a hybrid model, to use the pandemic popular phrase, where people are going to start using some different solutions throughout the employee life cycle, or even just the year.
I think it's really interesting you talk about the fact that tech sometimes drives that rather than the people or the business, because the tech provider can do it, and like you said, it sounds like an amazing idea, and you're thinking we can check this, see how our people feel about this straight away, we can act, we can be agile, I've been in those sales pitches, I've seen it happen, and you're thinking and saying, yeah, that sounds really great, and then when it comes into practice, the reality of what that delivers is sometimes less than you're intending, and I think just because tech can solve the problem, shouldn't always be applied. And I can see the similarities in learning, where we've got learning in the flow of work. You can learn all the time, you can have access to any of these libraries, but it just creates a bit of a free for all and undirected, or with people not being focused on, why am I learning this? What's the benefit? What am I going to do with this information? How am I going to progress? How's the organisation going to truly understand who should be doing what and help guide people to that? I think the tech enables, but sometimes our strategies haven't caught up, or our way of thinking hasn't caught up. And you talked about a hybrid model there, so it'd be interesting to think about what that hybrid model for engagement might look like.
I mean, it is interesting, isn't it? And I mean, just one of the things that you were just talking about there, in terms of just because tech can do it, I think one of the things that we've seen has been the expectation that you can take out the specialist role and replace that with technology. And whilst that sounds brilliant, and in some instances you can absolutely do that, it also is putting extra pressure into the wrong place. Every line manager is not a learning expert. Every line manager is not an insights expert. Every line manager is not an engagement or employee experience expert. They're probably an expert in what they do, and that's probably a generalist role. And what we're saying is, actually, if you push it to the employee, push it to the line manager, in isolation of any support, then effectively what you're doing is you are reducing the value of anyone who has insights into this and thoughts into developing this as a strategic approach for an organization. And effectively what you do is you make it a SaaS solution, which plays margins. I mean, again, sorry, cynical approach here. My cynical view is a tech company's desire is to exit. That the tech company's desire is to be sold in 5 years' time. So they will keep their margins high, keep their people low, and they will deploy fast and quick solutions to businesses. So marketing is everything. Tech that works is everything. The results is probably not so important to them as their profits, because in 5 years' time they'll exit, and if a new company comes along because that company hasn't solved it, so be it. Sorry, very cynical little monologue there.
I can see that, because you talked about capability of people around the systems there. You've talked about the motivation of those people putting systems in, and thinking we talk about this regularly as well in terms of learning tech. That what's that learning tech do to that there to do? Is it there to solve a business problem, or is it there to solve another problem that learning has created? Is it there to do something quite superficial? So, the fact that something might look great and people might engage with it, it's a bit like going for a meal and thinking you have a meal and it tastes great, but 20 minutes later you're hungry and it hasn't sustained you, but it's given you a bit of a hit. It's like a one-hit wonder. It's quite superficial. And some of those more impactful longer term things take a bit more effort, and they're not quite so easy. So sometimes people pick a learning system because it's really easy to get working for people, or it's really easy to run, and you then look at it and go, yeah, but what do you do with it? What change is that making to your business? And you talked about the capabilities of line managers, but also what's the capabilities of those HR, engagement, or learning professionals? Because previously they might have been doing a lot of admin, but they've now got a system that takes that away, and they should be doing more insight work, more planning work, different levels of roles. But we don't often help those people change their mindset, skill set, give them the capability, the room, the tools, or change the expectations. So I think there's a whole load of stuff around there that just in that little monologue, Nick, we could probably talk for hours around some of those issues.
I mean, I guess, yeah, I mean, I guess answering your original question, which was what does a hybrid model look like, and playing back into some of the stuff you've just said. So what do I think a hybrid model looks like? I think that, number one, I think employee feedback is important. I think that however anyone delivers that employee feedback, you know, whether that be through focus groups, you know, actively going out and talking to people, using some kind of technology to enable that. I do think that's important. I genuinely think it is important to be able to understand context and understand how people feel about the workplace that you've designed. But I also think it's got to be broader than that. So my view would be something along the lines of the annual survey isn't dead. The annual survey is a very important baseline operation. So being able to go out and ask all of your employees a similar set of questions and be able to come back and say, these are the areas that are giving us concern, but then being able to drill down into that data and say the problem in the finance team is different to the problem in the logistics team. So ultimately, what do we want to do? We want to solve a problem. So exactly what you were just saying, which was, you know, the purpose of this is to solve problems, to make life better for the people working in an organization, to make life better for the customers and stakeholders downstream from that organization, and ultimately to help companies drive profit, to have good performance, and have employees that are satisfied in what they do and motivated. And I think that actually what we've done is, you know, when somebody uses a pulse survey once a month, probably isn't going to get that information. But using a pulse survey in a targeted approach where you can say, I can see the problem in the finance team is this. These are the areas we're going to tackle, and use pulse surveys just for finance to measure that change, to see if you're in the direction of travel is the right one. Are we making positive change for our people? Are we seeing that impact coming through from the actions we're taking? I think as well, throughout the life cycle, we do a lot of life cycle surveys. So whether that be the candidate experience, so even people that haven't joined the organization, you know, what are their experiences of that process? New joiners, you're 3 months in, has expectation met reality? Did they come together in the way you expected? Understanding why people stay in an organization, and then why do people leave an organization, and then kind of going that pre-start, start, middle, end life cycle can actually pull through some really interesting information. We're also seeing clients running pulse surveys around what's important to them as an organization, and they set a cadence that says, you know, we'll always ask some questions, maybe quarterly, because we can act on a quarterly bit of information. You know, we've got 12 weeks now before the next one. We can act on that 12 weeks. But each quarter we're going to explore a different theme from our annual survey. So, you know, we've got a client that has explored equality, diversity, inclusion, that they've explored learning, growth, development and opportunity. They've explored leadership, and being able to actually introduce other areas, they can now say, well, actually, we're going to explore this further just with one section of the organization. So I think there's a more hybrid model that needs to come in here. But the key thing here is that there's a lot of information coming in here. So tech has to be able to like make viewing data easy. But I genuinely think that you need to have some people in that mix. So you need to either have some people in-house, or you need to be partnering with an organization that has people. Our view is we are insights experts, we are employee experience and feedback experts, so, and we've got the technology that can deliver that. So we're saying that's a nice rounded view. So a hybrid organization like us that has tech and people, working with an organization, delivering employee feedback in a hybrid way, focus groups, tech, you know, big surveys and smaller focus surveys as well. That's kind of the view that I think we're going to move into.
And what about on an organisational point of view? How are people viewing how engagement data should be used or positioned? You know, from those days of, okay, we just want to look good, we just want this data to tell us a good story so we can use it as a benchmark, through to this view that you talked about of the always on survey, so we can keep on top of our agilely changing organization. Where should this be positioned and managed to allow that engagement team or HR team to bring their stakeholders on that journey?
I guess there's a few things. So again, the old view was you focus on a number. So let's take an aggregated engagement score and let's focus on that. It drives bad behaviours. Rob in our team, who's our director of people science, has just written a blog and created an infographic called, if you're focusing on the number, then you're going to create some bad behaviours. And his point is that the number isn't the goal. The number is just the outcome. So I think more and more people are now looking to run surveys and understand how outcomes and outputs influence scores, and understand, when we're looking at scoring, we're looking at something along the lines of having that data that's relevant to the decisions you need to make as an organisation to inform people's strategy, to inform well-being and learning and development. So what are the needs of individuals? We're seeing a lot more personalisation coming through. So I think one of the things the pandemic has done is to drive personalisation. Individuals need different things at different points in their life. During the pandemic, they certainly need different elements. Growth, learning, development has been a key area. How do you distribute that? So I do think it is giving people the information. What tech can do is give people that information in the easiest, simplest way that they can understand. And what the people can do is drive the insights from that information. So I do think it's a far more strategic role in in-house organisations now, which is we're going to take a strategy view of this data and we're going to do something with it. Taking action is everything.
And I think that taking action, I've been in organisations where the annual survey runs round and you think, nothing ever happens, there's no output from this, or you've got, managers who are in that mindset of, it's just another of those things pushed out by a central team. So, as well as getting that senior stakeholder, it's how do you get the rest of the organisation engaged? How do you get line managers? How do you get the employees and position this, particularly if you're doing something along the hybrid model, so you're moving from whether you're bought a fashionable always on survey system where nothing ever happened, or you're in that annual cycle. How do you go about thinking about engaging those stakeholders and creating that what's in it for them, and moving them from that slightly cynical, and I'm sure we can both put ourselves in the cynical camp to understand why they're there, towards actually this is something that's going to be useful for me, my organisation?
So I think there's probably two key areas there. So number one is great communication, and number two is taking action. So and taking action shouldn't be a cascaded action that this is what you need to do. Managers, this is where introducing tech, taking away administration from internal teams to free up time. This is where you can now excel at this and support managers in taking action. So helping managers understand how to deliver that, and then to deliver that, is vital. If you're going to run a survey and not do anything with it, then the next time you run a survey, you should expect to have lower results, or you should expect to have lower take up of that, because it's the law of diminished returns. However, if you take action, we see it a lot with clients where they work hard with their managers to communicate the results, to talk to them about why is it important, to put it into human terms. So take the jargon out, take the blarney out, and just make it something that people can really understand. If you did this one thing with your team, it would make a difference. These are some changes we want at an organizational level. However, some of you are already doing that, because that's again some of that frustration is, well, I am already doing this, so why am I receiving that comms? So make it personal, and it doesn't mean you've got to work a little bit harder, but again, choose a partner that's going to work with you. Choose a provider that's going to help you deliver that, that's going to hold webinars for your managers, that's going to provide training and support for people. Work with your comms team to deliver that. I think it's it's everything. And when you've done something, you know, the you said we did model of engagement gets, I don't know, gets some bad press on occasion. But I think it's because it's associated to that old model of we run a survey, we did this, you said this, we did this. But actually, you do need to say this to people. You said this and we did this. And somebody who didn't take part in the survey and maybe doesn't agree with that position says, well, I don't agree that you should have done that. Well, then take part, and that's where your voice can come in and be a part of what we're going to do. I also think it's important to remember that there's external factors to this. So there's a lot of noise in trade press, in social media around what is important. So the other real important thing around something like employee feedback or running surveys or any kind of employee insight data, whether it comes from a comms platform, a learning platform, from attendance platforms, whatever that is it's providing you evidence data for your organization. So if the shiny thing in the world is belonging or well-being, and everyone's focused on that, you need to know as an organization, and you need your managers to know, is that something that we need to work on? Is that something we don't need to work on, or something we need to just sustain because we're already doing a great job at that? Because the risk is you hear the news that, you know, well-being is a major issue, but it might not be in your organization.
I think, you know, it's a really key point around, you've got the external factors, and so often it can almost feel, you know, I've been in HR teams where it feels like you're just asked to chase the ball around the playground because, you know, something's come in, this is in the press and this is the latest initiative, and you're not really in control. You're just running to the next fad, the next focus, the next external crisis, or the next bit of legislation. So being able to step back and have that confidence of the data helping you to navigate some of those distractions that are coming along, or thinking about how you can bring your people more into surveys, because, you know, how do people shape what you're asking and what you're looking at, and how do you sort of evolve and make people feel that they own that a little bit more, rather than this thing being done to them every so often.
Yeah, and driving context, because context is everything in any part of an organization. Context is everything. And, you know, it was interesting looking at our insights, and, you know, when we looked at what are high performing areas of employee experience in the surveys we'd run, and what were the lower performing areas, so what was driving poor employee experience, actually well-being was quite high. So well-being was scoring quite high. People were saying, actually, I am able to prioritize my well-being and deliver my job. You know, there are areas we need to improve. I feel like my workload is too high. 30% of people said, I do feel exhausted at the end of my day. So there's areas that need to be improved. And I think if anyone said that employee well-being wasn't important, they're an arse. It's got to be important. It's, you know, well-being for anyone in a community, whether that's an organization or society, has to be important and has to be a priority. But is it the problem you've got? Whereas actually, if we look at our data, growth, so looking at aspects of learning, development, opportunity, you know, badged under a big area of growth is an area that absolutely is an impact on the employee experience. The overall experience that people have at work is it's a massive area that people need to work from, but we don't hear that as a fad, soundbite, popular thing in the press, because well-being you can deploy fairly simple. You can deploy well-being benefits, you can deploy well-being tech, you can introduce no end of apps to your organization, very low cost, very quick. And that's where tech has been amazing in delivering this. There's some stuff around financial education, financial services that may require people, but growth, recognition, trust, that are the lower scoring areas, you won't find a app that solves trust, and you won't find tech that delivers learning, opportunity and growth on its own. These are all areas that require people. So being able to understand that as an organization and being able to say, what's important to our people is better opportunities to grow, to learn, to develop, whether that's in internal skills or external skills. So the world keeps moving externally, so we should support people in staying and thriving in that world. Having that data is vital, and getting that data from your people, a microscopic part of a macroscopic society or group of companies or whatever, is actually vital to any strategy that you're going to set, I think.
And you come back to learning now, which is obviously where our focus is, on trying to get organisations to think about how they create that opportunity, that purpose for people's development, that progression, keeping people internally, but also, people do want to move, they want to progress, but keeping that reality of what you can offer people, the experience, the development, and there's lots of things spoken about those things. Now, maybe asking a bit of an odd question, but you obviously have access to lots of data people have around learning. So we hear all of this rhetoric in the learning space about, what the greatest thought leaders think you should be doing. And, my cynical side said they're also then 3 weeks later partner with a tech provider who happens to miraculously solve that problem. But, looking from your perspective, what are you seeing as some of those things people are feeding back on in learning, or the trends in learning and development? What's that slightly impartial view on this?
So I guess, so if I look at the data, I've got it in front of me. So
it was such a great conversation with Nick that we split this podcast episode into two. So join us for the second part if you want to hear Nick answer the question and give us a bit more insight into what the data is telling us about what people really think about learning in our organisations.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Learning Reinvented podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. You can register to join the Learning Effect community. The link to do so is in the show notes below. If you've not already done so, please follow our podcast. And if the Learning Effect can help you and your organisation, please do get in touch. You can find both James and Katie on LinkedIn, and our contact details are in the show notes below.